Flight attendant mocks black woman, then the CEO walks in, and it's her sister. Picture stepping onto a plane with every expectation of a peaceful journey, only to find yourself singled out in a humiliating way for all to see. That's exactly what happens in this jaw-dropping account of an abrasive flight attendant who openly mocks a passenger she believes is powerless. Little does she know, the woman she's ridiculing has connections at the very top of the airline's chain of command. What begins as a casual act of disrespect quickly spirals into a showdown that no one on board could have foreseen. Brace yourself for a whirlwind of shocking twists, corporate intrigue, and a karmic reckoning you won't soon forget. Janelle Carter swiped her phone off the kitchen counter and read the email for what felt like the 100th time. She couldn't believe it. She'd been personally invited to IBM's annual leadership summit in New York City. Her work in community outreach and public relations had finally paid off. She was being recognized on a national stage. Though she was excited, her nerves rattled at the thought of flying. Growing up in a financially strapped household, she'd rarely traveled. Each airplane trip felt like an event of monumental proportions. Standing in her modest Atlanta apartment, she paced the hardwood floors, phone in hand, debating what to wear, how early to arrive at the airport, and if her older sister, Amelia, would have time to see her during the trip. Amelia Carter was the family success story. They were close, but not in the daily phone call sense. Amelia's meteoric rise in the corporate world meant she was always busy. Janelle often wondered if her sister missed the simpler days when they shared bunk beds and giggled about school crushes. Little did Janelle know that her upcoming flight to New York would spark a series of events that would bring them closer and tear apart an entire airline's carefully polished image. At 5:00 a.m., Janelle slipped on her most comfortable flats, grabbed her modest carry-on, and called a rideshare to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Even at this early hour, the sprawling terminals were alive with energy, travelers hauling luggage, families saying tearful goodbyes, and seasoned flyers sipping coffee in half-awake stupors. As Janelle joined the snaking security line, she mentally ran through her itinerary. Upon arriving in New York, she'd check into her hotel, attend the summit's registration, and maybe squeeze in a visit to her favorite Manhattan bookstore. Despite her underlying jitters about flying, she was determined to embrace every opportunity this trip offered. After clearing security, she settled at gate 29, scanning the crowd. Most travelers kept to themselves. Some dozed, while others hunched over phones, reading email or scrolling through social media. Janelle's thoughts drifted to Amelia. She hadn't told her sister she'd be in New York. Amelia had become so wrapped up in the corporate world, some top-level position at Skyrise Airways, as far as Janelle knew. She figured she'd surprise her sister with a quick text once she landed. If only she'd known what fate had in store for her on this particular flight. An announcement crackled over the intercom. "Good morning, passengers. We will now begin boarding Skyrise Airways Flight 27 to John F. Kennedy International Airport. Passengers needing special assistance, please step forward." Janelle heard the airline's name, Skyrise Airways, and felt a small pang of pride. Amelia's airline, she thought. She watched as the first few rows of travelers were invited to board. Eventually, her zone was called. Clutching her ticket and ID, she shuffled forward in line, a mix of excitement and nerves tumbling in her stomach. When she reached the boarding door, a petite flight attendant with a perfectly coiffed bun scanned her ticket. The attendant, her name tag read, Becky, offered a plastic smile. "Welcome aboard," she said. "Have a pleasant flight." The words were polite enough, but the tone felt a bit curt. Janelle brushed it off. Flight attendants often juggled a mountain of tasks, especially at peak travel times. Stepping onto the aircraft, Janelle inhaled the familiar cabin smell, stale coffee, disinfectant, and the faint whiff of lingering perfume. She slid into her assigned window seat in row 16, carefully stowed her carry-on, and tried to relax. Little did she know that the next few hours would shake her to her core. As Janelle fastened her seatbelt, she noticed Becky heading down the aisle with a brisk, almost rigid posture. Becky smiled at select passengers, a man in a suit, an elderly couple, but when her gaze fell on Janelle, it wavered. For a moment she offered nothing more than a quick nod, then hurried off. At first, Janelle dismissed any negative thoughts. She must be busy, she reasoned. But as the cabin door closed and the safety announcements began, a subtle tension flickered every time Becky passed Janelle's row. It was in the way Becky's eyes narrowed, or how she'd offer extras like a blanket or pillow to others, while bypassing Janelle entirely. The plane taxied, engines roaring to life. Janelle tried distracting herself with the Airlines in Flight magazine, reading about exotic travel destinations she could only dream of visiting, but the uneasy feeling refused to go away. She caught Becky sneaking quick, disdainful glances at her. "Is it my imagination?" Janelle wondered. She couldn't shake a growing sense of discomfort, as though she'd become the target of some silent animosity. If only it remained silent. Soon, Becky's hostility would burst out into the open. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, the flight attendants began their initial beverage service. 2 attendants worked the aisles, offering sodas, juices, coffee, or tea. Janelle watched as Becky served the rows ahead of hers with mechanical efficiency. Smiling for one passenger, helping another open a tray table, it all seemed standard. Yet when Becky arrived at Janelle's row, she barely paused. "Anything to drink?" Her tone was clipped, her eyes darting away as if she couldn't be bothered to hold Janelle's gaze. "Could I have some water?" Janelle asked politely. Becky poured the water but placed it on Janelle's tray with a noticeable thud. The liquid sloshed, nearly spilling. "There," she said flatly, then wheeled the cart away without another word. A man seated behind. Janelle leaned forward, eyes concerned. "That was rude," he whispered. Janelle shrugged, cheeks burning. She didn't want to cause a scene, but the knot in her stomach tightened. She took a small sip of water to steady her nerves. Her weekend bag of peanuts suddenly felt too heavy to hold. "What did I do to deserve this?" she thought, oblivious to the storm gathering just beyond the curtain. Roughly an hour into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed slightly to allow travelers to rest. Janelle felt a cold draft from the overhead air vent. She fumbled with the tiny knob above her seat, trying to adjust the flow, but it seemed stuck. She politely pressed the call button, hoping another attendant, anyone but Becky, would come to assist. Unfortunately, Becky arrived. She stood by Janelle's seat with an expression that was a mixture of annoyance and impatience. "Yes?" Becky asked. "Sorry, but I can't turn off this air vent," Janelle explained, pointing upward. "Could you help? Or maybe provide a blanket?" Becky sighed audibly. "We have a limited number of blankets. Economy passengers aren't always guaranteed one. Maybe you should have brought a jacket." A couple of passengers nearby glanced over, alarmed by the tone. Janelle blinked, taken aback. "I understand," she managed, voice calm. "It's just really cold. If there's an extra blanket, I'd appreciate it." Becky rolled her eyes. "Fine, I'll see what I can do." Then, as she turned to walk away, she mumbled, just loud enough for Janelle to hear, "Some people just can't be pleased." It felt like a slap in the face. Janelle sank back into her seat, shivering from both the cold air and the searing humiliation. Janelle stared out of the window at the endless stretch of clouds, her thoughts swirling. Had she misread Becky's attitude? Was she just overly sensitive? But the more she replayed the interactions in her head, the more certain she became that Becky was deliberately being rude. She glanced around the cabin, observing Becky's interaction with other passengers. Becky chatted amiably with a young white couple across the aisle, giggling about the woman's engagement ring. Moments later, Becky stopped by an older gentleman's seat, offering him a second cup of coffee and even an extra cookie. The difference was stark. Unsure of what to do next, Janelle opened the in-flight magazine again, pretending to read. But her mind wouldn't rest. She considered talking to another flight attendant, maybe even the lead, but she feared escalating the situation. She hated conflict, and she was mindful that being a black woman in these scenarios sometimes led to blame being pinned on her, or her feelings being dismissed as oversensitivity. Still, a seed of determination was planted. She couldn't just let it slide. If Becky kept pushing, Janelle resolved she'd speak up. Consequences be damned. An hour later, after the plane experienced a pocket of turbulence, the flight attendants resumed their rounds to check on passengers. A different attendant, a tall man named Mark, approached Janelle, asking if she needed anything. Grateful for a friendlier face, she requested help with the stubborn air vent. Mark fiddled with it until the airflow finally tapered off. He also offered Janelle a leftover blanket from first class, a small courtesy that went a long way. Janelle thanked him with genuine relief. Mark smiled. "No problem. I'm sorry for the inconvenience," he said kindly. "We want you to have a comfortable flight." As Mark moved on to the next row, Janelle felt her shoulders relax a bit. There was at least one crew member who treated her decently. She wondered if Mark had any idea about Becky's behavior, or if this was a pattern. Her mind drifted to the notion of reporting Becky, but she still hesitated. People lost their jobs over complaints. She wasn't sure she wanted that on her conscience, unless it was absolutely necessary. Little did she know, Becky's next move would shatter all her hesitations and push her to act forcefully and definitively. Trash bags for cleanup. She moved robotically, exchanging quick pleasantries with passengers, everyone except Janelle. When she reached Janelle's seat, Becky didn't say a word, just held out the trash bag as if expecting Janelle to wordlessly comply. Trying to keep the peace, Janelle handed over a small napkin and an empty cup. Becky shoved the trash into the bag and then, with a sharp glare, hissed, "Why are you staring at me?" Janelle's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" she asked, shocked. "You heard me," Becky continued, her voice low. "Don't act like I can't feel your eyes burning into me. If you have a problem, just say it." Nearby passengers looked on, some exchanging uneasy glances. Janelle's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She fought the urge to snap back. "I'm not staring," she managed calmly. "I'm just sitting here." Becky's nostrils flared. "Sure you are," she said, then turned and marched up the aisle without waiting for a response. In that moment, Janelle knew the conflict had escalated. It was no longer a matter of side glances and subtle slights. Becky had made her hostility blatantly clear. Hands trembling, Janelle decided she'd had enough. She pressed the call button, hoping Mark would respond again. To her relief, he appeared after a few moments, his expression concerned. "Is everything okay?" he asked softly. Janelle took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'd like to file a complaint about the flight attendant, Becky. She's been rude and confrontational. I've done nothing to provoke her." Mark's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "I'm sorry you're having a bad experience. Let me get the lead attendant or a supervisor to address this." Janelle nodded. She tried to calm her pulse as Mark headed toward the front of the cabin. Moments later, he returned with a woman named Paula, who introduced herself as the in-flight supervisor. Paula led Janelle to a small alcove near the galley, away from other passengers, and asked her to describe the incidents in detail. Janelle recounted everything: Becky's curt manner, the denial of a blanket, the insinuation she was being difficult, and the final confrontation. Paula listened intently, taking notes. When Janelle finished, Paula assured her, "I'll speak with Becky. I promise this will be handled." Relief flickered across Janelle's face, but she remained cautious. She'd taken a stand, and there was no going back. After Janelle returned to her seat, she noticed Becky and Paula having a heated, whispered conversation in the galley. Becky shook her head vehemently, gesturing toward Janelle's row. Paula seemed to maintain composure, but her lips were pressed in a thin line, suggesting rising tension. For a while, Becky disappeared from view. Mark continued the drink service alone, offering Janelle an apologetic glance. Just when Janelle thought the drama might settle, Becky re-emerged, passing through the aisle to gather meal trays. As she neared Janelle, she slammed the metal cart into the back of Janelle's seat, hard enough to jostle her forward. "Watch it," Becky snapped, as if it were Janelle's fault. A nearby passenger gasped. Another quickly asked if Janelle was okay. Rubbing her shoulder where it hit the seat in front, Janelle managed to nod, though tears of anger stung her eyes. That was it. Becky's anger had erupted into a public display of aggression. Paula rushed over, having witnessed the altercation. "Becky," she hissed, "step into the galley now." As Becky stalked off, Paula turned to Janelle with genuine concern. "I'm so sorry. I'll report this to our base. Please stay calm." Janelle realized that calm was the last thing she felt. She'd gone from an invisible target to an outright victim of harassment. Safely strapped back in her seat, Janelle tried to steady her racing heart. The flight was still in progress, and she had a sense that turbulence, both literal and metaphorical, was far from over. She considered texting Amelia about the ordeal, but decided to wait. She didn't want to ruin her sister's day with frantic messages, especially if Amelia was in the middle of an important meeting. Then, as if on cue, Janelle's phone buzzed. It was a text from Amelia, surprising, because Amelia rarely had time to send casual messages. "Hey sis, heard you might be in NY soon. Is that true? Let's catch up if you have time." Janelle smiled faintly. How could Amelia possibly know she was heading to New York? Perhaps word of the IBM Leadership Summit had circulated in their shared professional circles. Or maybe a mutual friend had mentioned it. Either way, Janelle typed a quick reply, "Yes, on my way now. Flight's been eventful, but I'll let you know when I land." Hitting send, she had no idea that Amelia's involvement would soon become far more direct and far more shocking than either sister could anticipate. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. We are experiencing some turbulence." The overhead speaker crackled. The plane began to jostle, and Janelle gripped the armrests. She wasn't a fearful flyer, but given the stress of the morning, her nerves were on edge. The plane lurched, and a few overhead compartments rattled. A collective hush fell over the cabin. During the turbulence, Becky was nowhere to be seen. Paula and Mark moved down the aisles, ensuring passengers were secure. As Mark passed Janelle's row, he knelt down briefly and whispered, "I'm so sorry about all this. It's not right." Janelle exhaled shakily. "Thank you. Do you know why she's acting like this?" Mark hesitated. "I can't say for sure. I've worked with Becky before. She can be intense, but I've never seen her single someone out like this." That confession only heightened Janelle's confusion. If Becky didn't usually act this way, why target her? The plane gave another bump, stalling further conversation. Janelle closed her eyes, saying a silent prayer that the rest of the journey would pass without more drama, or at least no physical harm. When the plane finally began its descent into New York, tension still hung thick in the air. Janelle felt a profound sense of relief, knowing she'd soon be off the aircraft. She watched the city skyline come into view through her window, the early morning sun reflecting off the skyscrapers. Normally, she would have been brimming with excitement visiting the Big Apple for a prestigious summit. But right now, she felt drained, her excitement dimmed by the ordeal in the sky. Upon landing, passengers hurriedly unbuckled, eager to deplane. Becky re-emerged, instructing everyone to remain seated until the seatbelt sign was turned off. Her voice was clipped over the PAR system, lacking the usual cheerful courtesy flight attendants used. Janelle wondered if Becky would confront her again before she left, but Becky vanished behind the flight deck door as soon as the aircraft parked at the gate. Paula, the in-flight supervisor, approached Janelle one last time. "I've already filed a complaint about this incident," she assured her. "I'll be calling our manager at JFK. They'll likely want your statement. I'm really sorry." Janelle, fatigued but grateful for Paula's support, nodded. "Thank you," she said, shoulders heavy with relief and lingering apprehension. Little did she know the chaos wasn't over. It was merely moving to a new stage this time, on solid ground. Janelle stepped off the jet bridge, feeling like she'd left a war zone behind. She had half a mind to rush straight to her hotel, but Paula had mentioned management might speak with her. Sure enough, as she entered the terminal, a uniformed Skyrise Airways agent stood waiting. A clipboard in hand. "Miss Carter?" the agent asked, scanning the crowd. "Yes, that's me." She felt a knot twist in her stomach. Was she in trouble somehow? "I'm Anthony from Customer Relations," he said. "Could you please follow me? We'd like to get some details about your experience on Flight 27. Though exhausted, Janelle complied. Anthony led her to a small office near the baggage claim area. Inside, two other airline representatives sat at a round table, their expressions solemn. They offered Janelle water and asked her to recount the flight's events. She repeated her story, Becky's rudeness, her refusal to offer basic amenities, the physical jolt from the cart, and her demeaning accusations. Anthony listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes. "Thank you for sharing," he said, voice steady. "We take these matters seriously. Our management will be in touch with next steps." Janelle nodded. She wondered who exactly management referred to and how high up this complaint would go. After nearly an hour in the Skyrise office, Janelle finally emerged, her phone buzzing in her pocket. She saw a text from Amelia. "Where are you? Let me know if you landed safely." Janelle exhaled, longing to share her frustrations with her sister. She typed back, "Just landed. Rough flight. Heading to the hotel soon." Then, pausing, she added, "Flight was with Skyrise, ironically. Some issues." Within seconds, Amelia responded, "What happened? I'm at the office now. I can have someone look into it." Janelle blinked in surprise. "Office?" She knew Amelia worked for Skyrise, but she hadn't realized her sister was physically in the JFK headquarters. That explained how Amelia knew Janelle might be in New York. Internal rosters or colleague chatter might have tipped her off. Before Janelle could reply, her phone rang, Amelia's caller ID flashing on the screen. "Hey, sis," Janelle answered, her voice trembling. "Janelle, are you okay? Tell me everything," Amelia said firmly. Over the next few minutes, Janelle recounted her horrifying flight experience. She left out no detail, from Becky's early dismissive behavior to the cart collision. Amelia's silence on the other end was tense and foreboding, like the calm before a storm. Amelia insisted that Janelle come directly to Skyrise's corporate office, located in a towering building adjacent to Terminal 4. Dragging her carry-on behind her, Janelle navigated the busy corridors and eventually found herself in an elevator heading toward the 27th floor. Her mind spun. Why was Amelia so adamant about seeing her right away? And why at the corporate office? She expected maybe they'd meet for lunch or dinner in Manhattan, not hold an impromptu meeting under the fluorescent lights of an airline headquarters. When the elevator doors slid open, Janelle stepped into a sleek lobby. An impressive logo, Skyrise Airways, decorated the glass wall. A receptionist directed her to a corner office with a stunning view of the runway. She barely had time to knock before the door flew open, revealing Amelia, clad in a sharp navy suit. Amelia's face, typically poised with corporate grace, was etched with concern. She pulled Janelle into a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry," Amelia murmured. "I had no idea you were on that flight until a friend in scheduling mentioned your name." Janelle drew back, confused yet comforted by her sister's presence. It's not your fault. But Amelia's next words hit Janelle like a bolt of lightning. Actually, I am partly responsible. I'm the new CEO of Skyrise Airways. For a moment, Janelle just stared at Amelia, trying to process her sister's revelation. Amelia Carter, CEO of Skyrise Airways. She knew Amelia was high up, but CEO. Amelia ushered Janelle into her spacious office, closing the door behind them. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased planes taxiing on the runway. The polished desk, dotted with strategic documents and model airplanes, loomed large. How? When? Janelle stammered, sinking into a plush chair. She realized her sister had indeed become a corporate heavyweight. Amelia ran a hand through her hair. It happened quickly. Our previous CEO resigned amid some controversies. The board asked me to step in, so I did. It's only been a few months. Janelle nodded, trying to wrap her head around this news. Part of her felt immense pride. Another part felt an odd sense of distance, as if Amelia had soared into a new realm. Janelle couldn't fully grasp. I need you to tell me every detail about this flight attendant, Amelia said, eyes narrowing with determination. Because if what you're saying is true, and I have zero reason to doubt you, this is more than a personnel issue. It's a crisis, and it's personal. Janelle took a deep breath and began retelling the entire ordeal, knowing that her sister now had the power to change everything. Amelia listened intently, her face shifting from concern to quiet fury as Janelle spoke. When Janelle finished, Amelia clicked open her laptop. Give me the flight number, seat number, times everything you can. Janelle provided the details, still somewhat in awe of her sister's commanding presence. Amelia typed rapidly, sending emails and messages through what appeared to be an internal Skyrise system. She requested the official cabin crew report, passenger manifests, and any incident logs filed mid-flight. She also asked to speak with Paula, the in-flight supervisor, and Mark, the attendant who'd shown kindness to Janelle. Within minutes, Amelia had scheduled a series of urgent meetings. She glanced at Janelle apologetically. I know you're exhausted, but I want you to be in the room when I address this. Your testimony is crucial. Janelle felt a surge of gratitude. After hours of feeling powerless in that airplane seat, she was finally being heard by none other than the airline's top executive, who also happened to be her big sister. Of course, Janelle replied. Whatever it takes to make this right. Amelia nodded, eyes reflecting steely resolve. Then let's get to work. Amelia escorted Janelle to a high-tech conference room where a handful of Skyrise managers had already gathered, each wearing an expression of anxious curiosity. Clearly, word had spread that the CEO's sister was at the center of a serious complaint. Thank you for assembling so quickly, Amelia began, commanding the room's attention with a calm but authoritative tone. We have a situation involving Flight 27 from Atlanta to JFK. Janelle Carter, my sister, was subjected to discriminatory and hostile treatment by one of our flight attendants, Becky. A murmur swept through the group. Anthony, the customer relations agent who had spoken to Janelle earlier, recounted his notes. Paula and Mark joined via video conference, apologizing again for the experience Janelle had endured. Paula described Becky's confrontational behavior, the moment she slammed the cart into Janelle's seat, and how she filed an immediate incident report. Amelia's gaze turned icy. Has Becky been brought in for questioning? A manager cleared his throat nervously. She was last seen leaving the terminal after her shift. We have her contact details. We can call her for a mandatory meeting. Do it, Amelia commanded, and I want a thorough review of any past complaints related to her conduct. Janelle observed silently, a mixture of relief and apprehension swirling inside her. This was all unfolding so fast, but it felt like justice might finally be on the horizon. A tense hour later, Becky arrived at the corporate office, clearly disheveled. She looked like she'd been summoned out of the blue, her once perfect bun now loose, her uniform slightly rumpled. Upon seeing the group assembled in the conference room and, more importantly, Amelia at the head of the table, Becky's eyes flickered with alarm. She sat down across from Janelle, arms crossed defensively. Anthony began the meeting by outlining the accusations and asking Becky to respond. For the first time, Janelle could see Becky close up, eyes darting, jaw clenched, clearly unsettled. Becky's voice trembled. "I didn't do anything wrong." She gestured toward Janelle, was being difficult the entire flight, pressing the call button, asking for special treatment, complaining about the temperature. "I never treated her differently than any other passenger." Paula cut in, voice firm. "That's not how we saw it. Multiple passengers reported your hostility." Becky's gaze flitted around the room, desperately searching for support. I was under stress. I didn't mean to come off as rude." She hesitated before adding in a lower voice, "I didn't know she was the CEO's sister." At that, Amelia's expression turned ferocious. "Does it matter who she is? All passengers deserve respect." Becky shrank in her seat, realizing her defense was crumbling before a far mightier storm. Amelia took a deep breath, as if reining in her temper, and nodded to another manager, who pulled up a digital file. "We've done some digging, Becky. It appears this isn't the first complaint regarding your behavior." Becky's face paled. "What? That's impossible." "The file is right here," the manager continued. "We have 2 formal complaints over the last 6 months, alleging rudeness and biased treatment, one from a passenger of Asian descent, another from a Latino family. Both times, you received warnings, yet there's no evidence of follow-up training or disciplinary action." Becky sputtered, tears welling. "Those were misunderstandings. I'm under a lot of pressure. Every flight is understaffed, and I have personal issues at home." She threw desperate looks around the table, seeking sympathy. Janelle watched in silence, her heart pounding. She remembered the humiliation she'd felt in the cabin. Now she saw Becky trying to excuse her actions, claiming it was all stress. "Is that how easily some people brush aside their cruelty?" she thought. Amelia leaned forward, her voice icy. "What about my sister's seat being slammed by the cart? Was that stress too?" Becky couldn't answer. She simply stared at the table, her composure unraveling in front of everyone. Silence enveloped the conference room, thick with tension. Finally, Becky cleared her throat. I'm sorry," she murmured, not lifting her eyes. "I never intended to harm or offend anyone. If Miss Carter felt disrespected, I apologize." Janelle frowned at the phrasing, "if she felt disrespected." It sounded more like a forced script than genuine remorse. Before she could respond, Amelia spoke up, every syllable measured. "This isn't just about feeling disrespected," Amelia said. "You showed blatant hostility and possible racial bias. That's unacceptable in any workplace, let alone an airline responsible for passenger safety and comfort." A flicker of indignation passed over Becky's face. "I'm not racist. I have friends of all backgrounds," she protested. Amelia's gaze hardened. "We're not here to debate your personal beliefs. We're here because your conduct toward my sister, and apparently others, violated company policy and basic human decency. As CEO, I have no choice but to place you on immediate suspension pending a full investigation." Becky's lip quivered, but she didn't argue. The fight had drained out of her, replaced by the grim realization that consequences were finally at hand. Amelia swiftly concluded the meeting, instructing the HR department to proceed with disciplinary protocols. Becky was asked to leave, and she did so with her head down, a security officer discreetly following to ensure there were no further outbursts. Once Becky was gone, Amelia turned to the rest of the group. I want a thorough review of our training programs, complaint procedures, and staff oversight. Clearly, something has fallen through the cracks. This is not the culture I want at Skyrise Airways. The managers nodded, jotting notes. Janelle sat quietly, soaking in the gravity of the moment. She felt a swirl of emotions, relief that justice seemed to be served, sadness over how easily prejudice can flourish in such a public-facing industry, and astonishment at seeing her sister in action as a commanding CEO. Amelia ended the discussion by thanking Paula and Mark for their honesty and reaffirming that the airline would stand by them for doing the right thing. Before leaving the conference room, Amelia looked at Janelle. "Let's go get some fresh air, sis." Janelle nodded, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. They'd tackled a storm together, but she sensed the real repercussions were only just beginning. Amelia guided Janelle to a rooftop terrace that overlooked the runways. A gentle breeze provided respite from the weighty atmosphere inside. Planes glided in and out of JFK Airport, busy with thousands of travelers who had no idea about the corporate drama unfolding nearby. They stood side by side, arms resting on the railing. Janelle finally broke the silence. "So, CEO, huh?" Amelia let out a soft laugh, tension easing. "Yeah, it's been a whirlwind, a lot of pressure. But I couldn't turn down the opportunity, especially after everything we dreamed of when we were kids." A pang of nostalgia hit Janelle. She recalled the days they'd raced bicycles in the neighborhood, vowing they'd both reach big heights. Amelia had soared to stratospheric levels in the business world, while Janelle found her passion in community outreach. Different paths, but equally important in their own ways. And now you're dealing with flight attendants who think they can get away with such behavior, Janelle sighed. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this." Amelia shook her head, her tone gentle. "You didn't drag me into anything. This is my responsibility as CEO and as your sister. We stand together." Over the next few days, Amelia and her team launched a comprehensive review of Skyrise Airways' internal policies. A memo was circulated announcing mandatory anti-discrimination training for all employees. HR specialists were brought in to audit complaint records and interview staff. Paula, the in-flight supervisor, was commended for swiftly reporting Becky's conduct, and Mark's supportive behavior was praised as an example of the airline's core values. Janelle, meanwhile, tried to focus on the IBM Leadership Summit. She attended keynote speeches, participated in panel discussions, and networked with professionals from around the globe. Yet she couldn't completely compartmentalize the whirlwind of events from the plane. The story had spread quickly through the airline's grapevine, and even some summit attendees asked if she was the Janelle Carter from the Skyrise incident. Amelia prepared for a press statement, anticipating media inquiries about a reported altercation involving the CEO's sister. She debated how to frame it should she publicly acknowledge the familial connection. Ultimately, Amelia decided transparency was best. "If we're going to be an airline that stands for accountability, we can't hide the truth," she stated firmly. And so, the stage was set for a public reckoning, one that would either tarnish Skyrise's reputation or elevate it, depending on how Amelia steered the narrative. 2 days later, Skyrise Airways issued an official press release. Skyrise Airways regrets to confirm a recent onboard incident involving one of our flight attendants and a passenger, Janelle Carter, who is also the sister of our CEO, Amelia Carter. We hold our employees to the highest standards of professionalism and respect. Any deviation from these standards is taken seriously. The flight attendant in question has been suspended pending an internal investigation. We are committed to maintaining a workplace free from discrimination. Within hours, various news outlets picked up the story. Airline CEOs, sister harassed by flight attendant, read a headline in the New York Times. Social media buzzed with discussions about workplace bias, the challenges faced by black travelers, and how corporate leadership could respond. Amelia prepared for interviews, her communications team crafting talking points. She refused to frame this as an isolated incident, openly acknowledging that biases can seep into any organization if not actively combated. Her candor struck a chord with many, but it also drew criticism from some corners who felt the CEO was blowing a minor flight dispute out of proportion. Amid the media frenzy, Janelle tried to maintain her composure. She had wanted justice for herself, not a spotlight shining on her family. Yet the spotlight had arrived, and she could only hope it would lead to real change. While the public conversation unfolded, Becky found herself under intense scrutiny. Her suspension meant her airline ID was temporarily revoked, and she was barred from entering Skyrise facilities without an appointment. Reporters, always eager for a sensational quote, sought her out at her home. She refused interviews, but rumors and partial leaks surfaced, painting her as either a misunderstood employee under stress or an overtly prejudiced flight attendant finally caught in the act. Colleagues who once considered Becky a friend distanced themselves, wary of associating with someone in the center of a corporate scandal. The union that represented flight attendants at Skyrise Airways issued a neutral statement, saying they would ensure Becky's right to due process but did not condone any discriminatory actions. Privately, Becky seethed with resentment. She called a few co-workers, venting about feeling betrayed by Paula and Mark. "They ganged up on me," she insisted, "just to impress the new CEO." But even Becky had to acknowledge that multiple passenger accounts corroborated her behavior. She was cornered, and she knew it. The question now was whether she'd accept responsibility or attempt a last-ditch effort to salvage her reputation no matter the cost. As part of Skyrise's formal disciplinary process, an internal hearing was scheduled. Senior HR officials, union representatives, and airline leadership convened in a boardroom to review evidence and decide Becky's fate. Janelle was invited to testify, though she wished more than anything she could simply move on from this nightmare. The hearing lasted hours. Statements from Paula, Mark, and even some passengers were read aloud. Janelle gave her account, describing Becky's hostility, the cart incident, and the stinging remarks. She kept her voice steady, refusing to be rattled by Becky's intermittent glares. When it was Becky's turn, she tried a different tack, no longer denying that the incidents occurred, but instead pleading for leniency. She tearfully claimed personal hardships, a sick family member, financial strains, emotional exhaustion. "I made terrible mistakes," she admitted, "but I'm not a hateful person." Some in the room looked sympathetic, others remained skeptical. Finally, HR officials announced they would deliberate and issue a final decision within 24 hours. Becky left the room looking haunted, while Janelle exhaled a sigh of relief. At least soon, she'd have closure, whatever form it took. The next morning, Janelle received an email from Amelia. Hearing concluded. Becky has been officially terminated for violating multiple sections of our Code of Conduct. We're also reviewing changes to our training and supervision processes. Wanted you to know first. Janelle stared at her phone, processing the news. Becky was fired. A wave of mixed emotions crashed over her relief that someone so hostile wouldn't continue harming other passengers. Empathy for the complicated mess Becky had brought upon herself, and a lingering sadness that it had to end this way. It didn't take long for the media to catch wind of Becky's termination. Some social media users applauded Skyrise for a decisive response. Others voiced skepticism, claiming Becky was just a scapegoat to protect the airline's reputation. Amelia, however, doubled down in interviews, pointing to new training programs and a more transparent complaint process as signs that Skyrise was serious about change. As for Janelle, she began to focus on her final day at the IBM Leadership Summit, hoping to transition back to normalcy. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that this entire ordeal represented more than just an individual's downfall. It was a microcosm of a broader fight against prejudice in corporate America. The IBM Leadership Summit wrapped up with a closing ceremony at a grand hotel ballroom in Midtown Manhattan. Janelle sat at a round table with other community engagement professionals, half listening to the keynote speaker. Her thoughts meandered between the fascinating topics at the summit and the emotional saga she'd just endured. After the ceremony, she stepped outside into the bustling city streets, bright lights and busy sidewalks providing a welcome distraction. She took a moment to reflect. What had she learned from this experience? She'd confronted a form of bias head-on, taken her stand, and emerged with her dignity intact. Perhaps even more importantly, she'd watched her sister demonstrate real leadership, transforming adversity into an opportunity for change. Pulling out her phone, Janelle texted Amelia, "Thanks for everything. Proud of you. Let's meet tonight for dinner." A wave of relief washed over her when Amelia quickly replied, "Absolutely. My treat. 7 p.m. at that Italian place we used to love." For the first time in days, Janelle felt the tension in her shoulders ease. The storm was over, and life was inching back to normal, albeit a new, more informed version of normal. Later that evening, Janelle slid into a cozy booth across from Amelia at a little Italian restaurant in Soho, a place they once frequented when Amelia had first moved to New York for business school. The smell of marinara sauce and garlic bread revived warm memories of simpler times. They clinked glasses of sparkling water. Amelia had to be up early for a board meeting the next day, and Janelle noticed her sister's slight fatigue. "Long week," she teased. Amelia laughed, though her eyes were weary. Understatement. This job is a marathon, not a sprint. But I wouldn't have it any other way. Their conversation ebbed and flowed. They talked about Becky's termination, the renewed corporate training initiatives, and the swirl of media coverage. Amelia confessed she'd received hate mail from some claiming she was overreacting by firing Becky. Yet, her resolve remained firm. Skyrise should represent safety and respect, not hidden hostility. As they dug into steaming plates of pasta, the tension between them melted. They might have taken different life paths, but in that moment, they recognized a deeper kinship, one founded on shared history and a shared commitment to integrity. No matter where destiny took them, they would always stand up for what was right. While Janelle prepared to return to Atlanta, Amelia busied herself overseeing the implementation of stricter protocols at Skyrise Airways. The airline circulated mandatory anti-bias training modules for all staff, from flight attendants and pilots to ground crew and office administrators. A new anonymous reporting system was unveiled, encouraging employees to speak up about any misconduct without fear of retribution. Employee morale saw a surprising boost. Many workers appreciated the clarity of the new guidelines, and stories began to trickle in of flight attendants stepping in when colleagues exhibited questionable behavior. Paula and Mark, in particular, were lauded for exemplifying how staff could handle a delicate situation responsibly. Public reaction was a mixed bag. Some lauded Skyrise for its proactive stance, while others remained cynical. But as weeks turned into months, the immediate scandal faded into memory, replaced by cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, this corporation was willing to hold itself accountable. And in Atlanta, Janelle started noticing small changes too. Emails from other organizations poured in, inviting her to speak about her experience and the importance of addressing racism in everyday scenarios. Doors she never knew existed were suddenly open. One morning, as Janelle sorted through her mail, she found a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. Her heart lurched when she saw it was from Becky. The tone was vastly different from the stony defensiveness Janelle had witnessed. "Janelle, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I'm sorry for my behavior. I lost my job because of my own actions. I know an apology doesn't erase what I did, but I'm trying to become a better person. If you can find it in your heart, I'd appreciate forgiveness, or at least the understanding that I never meant to be so hateful." Janelle sat at her kitchen table, rereading the letter. A part of her was skeptical. Was Becky truly remorseful, or just desperate? Another part felt a pang of empathy. People could change, but it took more than words on paper. She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. She wasn't sure if she was ready to respond, but a small part of her hoped Becky's words signaled genuine growth rather than a hollow excuse. Months passed. Skyrise Airways continued to refine its employee training, and internal satisfaction metrics steadily improved. Amelia balanced the demands of her CEO role with newfound activism, speaking at conferences on ethical leadership and fostering inclusive workplaces. She often cited the incident with Janelle not to shame Becky, but to illustrate how easily bias could go unchecked and how vital swift action was. As for Janelle, she embraced speaking engagements too, albeit on a smaller scale. She focused on encouraging people to speak up against everyday injustices, whether in an airplane cabin or a corporate boardroom. Her life began to reflect a new sense of confidence that came from surviving adversity and standing firm against it. On a crisp autumn day, Janelle boarded another Skyrise flight to attend a community outreach event in Chicago. She felt a familiar swirl of nerves, but this time the flight attendants greeted her warmly, offering help with her luggage and ensuring she was comfortable. She couldn't help but smile, realizing the change was real, perhaps in small increments, but real nonetheless. Looking out at the runway through her window, she whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for the power of sisterhood, and for the promise that every stand against discrimination moves the world a step closer to justice. And there you have it, a tale of how one flight attendant's terrible behavior led to a high-stakes reckoning within a global airline. Janelle's story reminds us that prejudice can rear its head anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. But it also proves that standing up for what's right, especially with the support of allies in this case, her own sister, who happened to be CEO, can spark meaningful change. Though not every instance of discrimination ends with swift justice, this story shows us what's possible when courage, responsibility, and accountability join forces. If you found yourself rooting for Janelle and Amelia, if their fight for dignity and fairness resonated with you, do your part by hitting like, sharing this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribing for more stories that showcase the power of justice. Let's keep this conversation alive, because every voice raised against inequality has the potential to transform our world. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.